Hello, everybody. This is Azrin here, owner of the Calgary Language Nerds, and this is an impromptu Blackfoot podcast. We were initially just going to do a brainstorming session and dry run, but then while we're doing our dry run and brainstorming session, we got into an interesting discussion um, about differences in the Blackfoot spoken in different regions. And so I thought, hey, let's actually get this recorded. So I'm with Blaze and Colton. Maybe Blaze, you want to tell us a little bit about you? You can do English and Blackfoot, and then Colton, you can introduce yourself too, and then you guys can keep up. We can continue the discussion where it left off. So Blaze, go ahead.
Itamiko ni xocoex, nistoco ki no mahka, ni toto, ganakoan. Nichites xenimasta kyo, manasta besti, matapix ki, ni date boasin ki, iksaka big boasin. Hello, my name is Blaze Russell, and I am from the Kainai Nation. I just recently graduated from the University of Lethbridge, majored in anthropology and focused on Blackfoot language and Japanese language. So, hello, everyone. Pleasure to make your acquaintance.
Colton?
Okay. Eitsi-poiksi matapiksi ikdamiksestakuki kitqunaaksamaatsimmo. Nistuakuka taqqkiittuupi ki nistuanqa piikaniikkuan ki amskapi piikaniikkuan. Nanistisamasksinamaatsuukku nanistisamasksinamaatsorki nitsiiporsinissuistui. Kenqainksistikku taqqteipoispinna nitsiiporsinistuu nitsinnaamki amukaanaakkuan eitsi-poiya. So my name is Colton. I'm from Pikani. I've been teaching Blackfoot for 4 years. And today I'm here with my boss Azrin and speak the Skanak one. So Blackfoot speaker, we're going to be talking about the real language.
And then I'll introduce myself briefly too. So my name, I can't do it in Blackfoot, unfortunately, but
You'll have to do it in Cree then.
Do it in Cree? That'd be funny. So my name is Azrin. I run a business called the Calgary Language Nerds. So I teach various languages. I teach 5 different languages myself. And then I have instructors who work for me that teach other languages. As we're recording this today, my business teaches 15 different languages. I met Colton initially. This would have been almost 2 or 3 years ago now. And we started to work together on a Blackfoot language revitalization project. So initially, Colton was teaching a group class. After that, he had a couple of private students. After that, we put together an introductory course, which is just on azrinthelanguagenerd.com. I'll put a link in the description box in case you guys want to check it out. And then by sheer coincidence, I met Blaze. This would have been, I want to say maybe 6 months ago, something like that. And it was a sheer coincidence. He was looking into Japanese lessons at my business, and then I realized he spoke Blackfoot. And I thought, wow, maybe we can get Colton and Blaze together on a podcast. And so both of them were interested. And so here we are. This is a Blackfoot podcast. Tentatively, unless you guys have another name option, maybe we can name it later if need be. My tentative idea is to call it Blackfoot Alive. Maybe there's a cool Blackfoot name with that too. You guys can come up with. Thought it's a cool name, but we can discuss that off recording to see what you guys think. But anyway, so today, Colton and Blaze, and I might chime in from time to time. They're talking about some differences between Blackfoot spoken in each of their respective communities. So I think Colton, or was it Colton or Blaze? I forget which word you were talking about now. Do you remember?
The weight, like the.
I forget. Just when I cut you, I just interrupted you to say, "Hey, let's record this." What was the word you guys were talking about?
We were just talking about greetings.
And
how right, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we kind of finished with that one, so I guess we could start up a new topic.
I mean, we could refresh on it since
Oh yeah, refresh
there
on it.
was
I can
a lot
forgot.
of.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
refresh on the greetings because we weren't recording then. Sure, why not?
we're just discussing the different greetings
So
between the bands.
in my demographic of like Canada with Northern Bicani, Apitos Bicani, Ghana, my band, the Bloods, and Siksika, which is close to Strathmore in Calgary. For greetings, kind of like commonly for beginners of Blackfoot, like they usually say like Oki Nitaniko Blaze or their Blackfoot name. So like Guy Nitaniko Guy Stao play. And then kind of proceeding to like intermediate or kind of like fluent level of Blackfoot language skill, like Nistoakok Guy Stao, like I am bear ghost. And I think with Siksika, which is kind of interesting, where they say Nitsinska Sim Blaze or Nitsinska Sim John, which kind of give you an example. Like I am the name I was given. So there's kind of like three different names. How do you introduce yourself? Like Nitaniko, my name is. Nistokok, I am, versus Nitsinska Sim, the name I was given. And for Colton, I believe that you guys have like a new kind of like a interesting collage of or
It just really depends on the speaker. Beginner levels, you pretty much always hear Nistunitaniko, but then everybody that's more advanced, everybody just introduces themselves a little bit different. A lot of people will say Nistuakok, some people will shorten Nistunitaniko to Nitaniko, or some people even say Nistutaniko, or they'll say Nistuaniko, Nistuamo, Nitsint. They use all of it. But the most common that I've seen is beginners will use Nistunitaniko, and then more advanced will kind of use Nistuakok. But Nistunitaniko is the most common down here.
Why?
And,
Why is there a difference? I'm actually curious. Why is there a difference between how a beginner would say it and how someone more advanced would say it?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it's just caught on because it's the easiest one to say. Because, you can't really go up to somebody on their first day of learning Blackfoot and tell them, okay, the way that we introduce ourselves, you got to say Nitsinchkasim. So it's kind of a hard word to say. Nitsinchkasim. Or I don't know why Nistuakok wasn't more common, but Nistunitaniku. It's not that Nistunitaniku is looked at as kind of more simple. It's just an observation that I've made. Of course, I have seen a lot of more advanced speakers use Nistunitaniku. I think it's just when you're more advanced, you're more open. You know that there's a lot more ways that you can introduce yourselves, and so maybe just kind of go that route. But Nistunitaniku is just the more. It's the most common way to introduce yourself, and so it thus kind of became the most basic. And so I think fluent speakers just kind of, since they know that there's more ways to introduce yourselves, they'll just use them. But yeah. Again,
Do you have anything else? Do you have any other things to add to that, Blaze, or that's your experience too?
Yeah, certainly. From one of my observations with being a student of Blackfoot, like I think like what Nitaniko is kind of like used as like a beginner age demographic, kind of like easy to articulate. So because compared to like other stuff, like some Blackfoot community members that can't emphasize like C versus Xi, say like for like Stoakok, no wait, Nitsinska Sim. So like sometimes that will kind of like be a tongue twister since most Blackfoot speakers are predominantly native English speakers. So I think that's where the kind of like the tongue twister has become like a very difficult process for them to kind of
tongue twister words have kind of become avoided, thus they're less used.
And like that's where like things kind of get really interesting. Say for instance, like the Stoakok, for instance, I noticed like here for organic which were kind of like the standard Blackfoot, which I don't really agree with that. I think that it's important to incorporate like more like dialects where they should embrace different grammatical capabilities or functions, which kind of like associate their identity in a unique form in Blackfoot culture and language. Anyway, the Stoic, I noticed like older generations, but those older generations are keenly associated to like ceremonial life or like enclaves. That's where like say like like your grandparents are like, oh, okay, you know, like what are you called, you know? So like that's kind of like then you begin to like the stoic oak, like I am. So like this
I
is kind
think
of that's
this
it.
reminded me of something. I think it also might be because it's easily paired with Takitaniku, because that's really the only way to ask somebody their name, other than asking Takakistu, which is very kind of rude. Like, who are you? And so I think it's just easier to cheat Nitaniku and Sakitaniku because they're the same word. Because it would be very confusing to tell someone, oh, the way you introduce yourself, you say Anistuako. But if you want to ask someone their name, you say Sakitaniku. So I think just to make it simpler.
Right, to like make it so that the way you
Yeah.
ask someone their name and the way you say my name is has some level of similarity.
See. Or yeah. See. It's because I was thinking the comparison that I was going to make is if you're teaching a beginner level Spanish, if you taught them, oh, the way that you ask them what's your name, if you taught them ¿Cómo te llamas? But you taught them to say my name is mi nombre es, you you know, it's very kind of complicated for a beginner. And I was
Maybe.
just thinking about that example. That's why I said sí.
You know, it's funny. I was thinking the same thing in my head, and then you said C, and I was like, I wonder if he was thinking the same thing. And sure enough, you were. That actually reminds me of something that Colton, you mentioned this to me a long time ago, probably at least a year ago, maybe more actually. We were talking about how you focused when you learned your Blackfeet, you focused on as much as you can on having good pronunciation. And you're telling me something like a lot of people that learn it nowadays, they don't focus as much on pronunciation, they focus on other aspects of the language. Um, and so yeah, it's interesting that that's why some people would choose to say a certain word or phrase a certain way, because it's just easier, literally just easier to pronounce if they're coming from an English background.
Yeah.
English is their quote unquote first language.
Yeah, a lot of it's because Blackfeet phonemes are very difficult for English speakers to not only say but to even hear. I remember I was just teaching somebody how to say the word for pine tree, and I told her Bachtuk, and she was Bachtu. That's right, Bachtu. I was like, no, Bachtuk, and she literally just couldn't even hear that at the end. And it's not that she was hard of hearing; it's just because it's just a sound that absolutely doesn't exist in English. And so I taught her. I said, I guess you could get away with saying Bachtuki, even though it's not really what a more advanced speaker would say. I'd understand it first, but so that's kind of a lot of that is what happens, is just having to simplify the word and then whatnot, if that makes sense. So
What
yeah.
what other different we were talking about some differences in pronunciation and words, like even the word for potato, for example, was one that came up. Like, what other words or phrases are there that are maybe commonly known as different? Like the word for potato, for example, apparently when you interact, you were saying something like when you interact with each other, you know, you get into these spirited debates. I'm assuming they're more friendly, but no, this is how you say potato. This is how you say potato. Are there any other words or phrases like that?
I think the most famous one is the one that we mentioned before the recording. Gedomatsin versus Gitakidamatsin. kita kita matsin is what we use down in Amskapi Pikani. And then this is another way that Amskapi Pikani kind of differentiates between Apatrsi Pikani. Apatrsi Pikani, they almost exclusively say Gedomatsin, just like Gan and Sixka. But down here, you never really hear anybody say Gedomatsin. Everybody says kita kita matsin. If you say Gedomatsin down here, they just think you sound Canadian. So that's another very popular instance.
Have you noticed that yourself, please?
It's like the English version is like about versus a boot.
Oh, yeah. Sorry and sorry.
From Z to Z.
Oh yeah. Kind of like that. Like we're aware of the differences, but we kind of keep to our own because it really sounds almost foreign to us when we hear the other way. Like I'll understand you if you say Z instead of Z, but I'd never say Z. I just know Z. Or like I'll understand you perfectly if you tell me I'm sorry, but you'll never really hear me saying, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm always gonna say like I'm sorry. And so that's kind of a lot of the ways that I can't really think of too many words that are completely different and well known about the differences between down here and up there. A lot of it is the accent and some of the grammar.
The one thing I noticed, like when we first met, like when we say like matquiki versus your interpretation, matkotapi, I think.
Matokapi.
Matkotapi versus
Oh, that's another. Matokapi is pretty much gone now. Me and my friend are like the only people I ever use matokapi, and this old woman that we learned it from. Because she told us matokweki is a Ghana word and it kind of just made its way down here. But she said the original peak anyway was to say matokapi. It's like, well, no big deal.
Versus here it's like we square kind of in a way.
Yeah. Well, matokweki and matokapi are very versatile words. You could use it to dismiss something, show indifference, to show, oh, no big deal or no biggie. It's good. So it's a very interesting word. But yeah, the original way to say it down here is matokapi. But most of the time we say matokweki. Even I most of the time say matokweki.
The funny thing about here for Ganikoiks, like when we use like matokweki, it's kind of like the French version of like c'est la vie, if you will.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. So like.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that too. Yeah, now that you think of it. I remember going to my first sweat with the Scanak when every time I'd make a mistake with the rocks or with helping, he'd just tell me, matokweki. But yeah. Yeah, it's a versatile word, but most of the time it's just c'est la vie.
It's like c'est la vie, but Blackfoot in a way. It's kind of cool.
C'est la vie. Say not be.
Say not be. Not be. I'm
Nah.
No, but yeah, like I think that with kind of like when I was looking at kind of like your language kids from Amskavikani, like you guys have a different word for grizzly bear compared to up here in Ganikoiks. Like we have a different version of grizzly bear and Blackfoot. So like how we say grizzly bear is like baksikoi, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But for you guys, I forgot what the Blackfoot word for your interpretation on grizzly bear. I'm not sure if you.
A brown-nosed bear. But baksikoi, I think the reason that might be is because baksikoi is more of a euphemism, because Ninabska they're not allowed to say bear, so they have to say baksikoi to kind of tiptoe around saying kyayo. And then really only the grizzly bear that you can't, from my understanding, that you're supposed to avoid saying. And so that's, I think, how baksikoi came up. But yeah, the way that we specify it. We also have baksikoi, but the way that we specify grizzly bears, a brown-nosed bear.
Even like with black bear here, like Sikimi versus your guys, like Sikyayo.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
That's new to me. Sikyayo, yeah. I didn't know you guys used sickemy.
Yeah, it's kind of like like you said, it's like a euphemism for like
Mm.
kind of like
Oh, that
beast.
makes sense.
Blues.
A sickemy is kind of just like any black animal. Should
Mhm.
make sense. Kind of tiptoe around bear.
Mhm. Yep. Always bearing necessity.
So the two of you've had, I think, two conversations in Blackfoot, correct? One
I
literally,
think so.
and then one was when you guys first met, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
So in the so maybe you could think back to your first conversation, like the first time you met and you're talking to each other. What immediately stood out for each of you in terms of how the other spoke? Like, oh, you say that. Oh, that's different. What immediately stood out?
I don't think I really noticed anything when he spoke that kind of stood out to me as different. Um, yeah, nothing that I could really point out to sound like
And is that because you have
typical
regular?
Ganak one.
Is that because you have regular contact with Ghana people?
Yeah,
I see.
doesn't really throw me off anymore.
One thing that kind of did throw me off with my relative from Skavigani, like when I say like ikaksa bigwigs, like for Japanese people,
Oh
like
yeah,
for
ikaksa.
white people. But for his dialect, I forgot what you said. But it was kind of like it kind of caught me off guard in a way. I was like, oh, that's interesting how you say it that way. So not sure if oh wait, is Colton active?
I think he's frozen.
Ooh boy.
What we'll do is I'm just going to pause this recording and then I'll unpause it once he's back in. So let me just click on pause. Everybody listening's not going to notice anything because, well,
Left off is
there we go. It's back. Sorry, Colton dropped off for a second, but we're back.
The spare come by and I had to fight him off because my phone got too hot, so it kicked me out.
Oh, okay.
so
Geneme. Yeah, ikaksapi quick, son.
mm, versus like one thing that stood out for me is like how you said like ikaksa bigwigs differently in your dialect.
Oh
It's
yeah,
kind of
ikaksapi quicks. Like the pronunciation or the word?
the word. Like you said it's
Tsapini quakes.
bigwigs.
I know both, but I wouldn't say one's more common. I'd say Tapaniquan is pretty rare, but I've only ever heard it used down here, and it's kind of more of a loan word because Tapini doesn't really mean anything. It comes from Japanese, just kind of a Blackfootized version of it, Tapini. Whereas Ghana came up with their own kind of word, ikaksapi kwan. So yeah, just some of the words that we create, especially more modern words, words that we didn't really have to use before the last 100 years, since the border. That's where a lot of the differences arose. For I think, Tsapanikwan and Ikaksapiquan are good examples, but also coffee. You know, we'll say asiksikimi, whereas Ghana say, is it nita asiksikimi, right?
Yeah, kitsi ni dape siksikimi.
Nitsi sukape. Yeah, so kind of more modern words, or not modern, but it's not brand new, but words and concepts new to us. That's where a lot of the differences come about from my experience.
It would be funny to do an episode once where, and maybe I can, if you each pick like 10 items or something that have been invented in recent history and be like,
Oh,
hey, like you just, I don't know, so I'm just gonna look around me here. Like I've got this, where's it? There it is. Like I've got this like Bluetooth speaker and be like, so, and like,
mm,
it's like a lightning round, like Colton, what would you call this? Like, Blaze, what would you call this? And like, you grab, I don't know, like I've got earphones here, right?
mm,
Kind of interesting. Like you take some new objects and see what you guys call them, right? Or what you would
yeah.
if you don't have a word for it. Like what would you call it if you had to make up a word? That could be kind of interesting.
That would be interesting. Just kind of lightning Blackfoot, lightning round.
Yeah, and
Or
Blaze,
See
you've got
who's
a
more modern. And who's Stone Age? Joke.
We can get like a graphic designed, like, yeah, like who's modern, who's like, we get like Blaze on the left or something, like black and white with like rocks around it, Stone Age Blaze, and like cool.
It's like Henry Morgan, like with the scale of civilization, if you will.
Yeah.
No, not to say like not like that in any
Yeah,
connotation.
that'd be interesting.
It would be like
Yeah, that'd be an interesting episode to kind of come up with their own. Oh yeah, to see if we could find anybody that already has a word for it, and then if not, so you can come up with the word. Because it is, once you try to think about it, it is very difficult to come up with some words. You know, some words are easy, like headphones, I call them what we use to kind of listen. Word here, but other things are very, like, how would I differentiate between Bluetooth and, I don't know, maybe I could call it utsqueaking, literally Bluetooth, utsqueaking.
That makes sense, actually.
How do you say Bluetooth in Spanish, Azrin, or like in your various languages?
I actually don't know. It's a good question. Yeah, I actually don't know. It's probably just
interesting. Just
it's
Bluetooth.
probably just Bluetooth with an accent, to be honest. But I'm gonna, while we do this, actually let me look it up right now. How to say Bluetooth? Let's just look in Spanish, for example. In Spanish, they probably say the same thing. Looks
Or is
like
it
in
lente azul?
I'm in
Lente azul.
I found this one guy. I'm in a forum, and there's a guy from Colombia, and he goes, "It's the same word." Another guy from a lady from Mexico says, "Blue." I'm not sure how they'd say it. Maybe Bluetooth, Bluetooth, maybe. Yeah, Bluetooth, maybe.
Yeah,
And
because
like,
that
es
thought doesn't
igual,
exist
así
in
lo
Spanish.
conocemos aquí, no tiene traducción. So it's the same here. There's no translation.
In Japanese, it could be
Because I
Bluetooth.
think, because what's interesting, actually, I've never thought about this. I sort of took it for granted. So Blaze told me, I think last week, that he has a particular interest in wordsmithing, so coming up with words that don't exist right now. So if there's an object, there's no word for it in Blackfoot to come up with a word. But one thing I realized right now is in many, 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 many other languages on the planet, not necessarily indigenous languages, but languages in general, they don't wordsmith. Instead, they borrow instead. So like in French, they'll say marketing for marketing, or like parking, the parking lot. So you throw in, or like in India, in a lot of Indian languages, they use a lot, they mix a lot of English into to how they speak. Often they Indianify it. I don't know the right word, but often what they'll do is they'll make it they'll take a word from English, they bring it into whatever Indian language, but then the meaning of that word slightly changes, possibly. My favorite one is when I was in India back in 2018. They kept saying that people turned off, and I was like, I didn't really understand what that meant initially, and it meant that they died. But they'd use the word off, like off, OFF in English. They'd say everything in Gujarati, and then they would put the word off, and they meant that they passed away, they died. And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Wordsmithing has been an interest of mine, but as I've seen more languages, I've seen that it's not the most common. You know, you'll get a couple countries that are very, dead set on language purism. Like I believe in Iceland, they don't have a word. They didn't borrow the word for tank, so they use like crawling dragon or something. But other languages, kind of English loanwords are so common they don't even realize it's English. I remember I saw this one video about this guy who's talking about his uncle that only spoke Hebrew and he knew nothing else. And his uncle's telling him, "Oh, let me teach you some Hebrew slang." And he said the Hebrew word for no, and then big deal. He's like, big deal is just like something else. He didn't even recognize it was English. And he thought like no big deal was like Hebrew slang. And so I think English is very kind of widespread in terms of, modern day things. And so I used to be very really try hard to come up with a word for everything, and then I kind of just I still try to come up with words, but I don't try as hard because like chapstick, I have no idea how I'd call this. So I'll just say amoy chapstick just to make it easier on myself. But yeah, it's kind of my ideas that I'd like for there to be more Blackfoot words for, modern things, but also, some things would just be easier to take as loan words. Or to even, if we were to do wordsmithing, I was thinking more and more recently about how they did it way back then when everybody only spoke Blackfoot. And a lot of the times, if they were to take a loan word, they would make it sound Blackfeet by some way. Like instead of saying popcorn, they said papoksin because it sounds like popcorn, but it's also a Blackfoot word, which means stream food. And so maybe that's a route we could take, or even to make it nonsense, but said with Blackfoot kind of sounds, like the English name Margaret in Blackfoot, you'd say Makanita, or the English word for George, we'd say Tsaltsi. So maybe we could just really Blackfeetize our pronunciation of these words, or the other option, just kind of make it ever so Blackfoot. Like, for instance, a really popular one from a couple hundred years ago is the word for napayin, bread. Comes from, I believe, la farine in French, which is the flour. I probably pronounced it wrong, but oh wow.
That was pretty good.
La
Yeah, la farine, that's correct. Yeah, la
la
farine.
farine to napayin. And so that's most of the time how it happened, if they didn't come up with the word itself. Or they'll use older words and kind of change its definition. Like the word nama, which means gun now, long time ago used to just mean bow. And so kind of any projectile object they just called nama, which became the word for gun. And so to do the wordsmithing, I think there's a couple different viable options that we could steal from our ancestors and then just kind of, or not options, but I forgot the word, but you know what I mean. A couple different ways that we could do it.
Totally. Well, I guess we can wrap this one up here. It was nice to get this impromptu episode for episode 1, which is cool. And to everyone, thanks for listening. I'll put any relevant links in the description, maybe any social media or the link to the online course that Colton's made, anything else that's relevant. I'll put it in the chat, sorry, in the description of the episode. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to see covered, you're more than welcome to. I'll put a link where you can send a message or leave a suggestion. On YouTube or something, you can just leave a comment. But if it's on a podcasting platform, there isn't any comment box per se. So I'll make sure there's a way to reach out. And any final words, Blaze or Colton?
Wow. See you all.
For the wordsmithing, it'll be kind of cool to actually see like how far can observation of Blackfoot can go. Like how far can the language evolve? It'd be kind of cool to see.
Yeah, totally.
Other than that, kita no.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording, guys. Don't leave the room though. We should schedule our next time. So everyone listening, thanks for listening. See you guys next time.